Hear me.
Скажи мне, американец, в чем сила?
А вы что, собираетесь на ней жениться?
Да.
Ух, красота-то какая, лепота.
Таможня дает добро.
И вообще не называй меня, пожалуйста, Вероникой. Кто я? Вот кто я?
Отныне русской земле единый быть.
Don't torture me, I can't live without him.
Hi, my name's Ali, and this is the Russophiles Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. As always, I'm joined by a guest, and today my guest is Spencer. Hi, Spencer.
Hello, Ali.
So, long-time listeners will remember you, Spencer, from the Tsar episode, which was like 3 or 4, so if you haven't caught that one, go back and listen and hear about that traumatizing film, but... For people who haven't heard you before, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I guess my main interest, the thing that I like to do is watch movies, and I have a podcast on Japanese film, mainly focused on Kurosawa, but / kind of turned into an excuse just to watch Japanese movies from like the 50s and 60s, just kind of so I can talk about it with my friend Joel, who's been on, I think, the Sun episode.
Yes, he was indeed, yeah.
Yeah, and what else? I write about films for my own blog, and I was trying to break into the world of film writing, and, that's kind of it.
Cool. Last time you were on, you were not nearly as far along with your podcast project. How many do you have left to go at this point?
We do episodes every 2 weeks, so that is... 1 Kurosawa per month, so I think it's 4 left.
Oh, wow. Okay. So probably by the time this comes out, you'll have wrapped up. Do you have an idea for what the next project might be?
Oh, yeah. We've known for probably close to a year at this point.
Oh, cool.
It was Joel's idea, because we were trying to figure out what director to pick next, and... I stupidly said Spielberg because he has a whole bunch of movies, but then we both realized that's kind of boring to do. And so Joel pointed out, well, you love Spike Lee, why don't we just do Spike Lee? And it's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. So we're switching to Spike Lee after that. Things will be a little different because it's American and modern, and it's a different director and it's a different era, so the format won't be exactly the same, but it'll be try to stick to the same things we did before.
Cool. Yeah, I for shame, as a supposed film buff, I've not actually seen any Spike Lee films yet at all. I mean, by the time this comes out, hopefully I will have seen BlacKkKlansman.
I love Spike Lee, but that is not one of my favorites. But I like that he's mainstream again.
Yeah, because it feels like, has it been a while since he's had a new movie out, or?
Oh no, he's been producing stuff like at least every other year.
Oh wow!
Since '86, I think.
Oh gosh.
Oh yeah, and he directs documentaries. He did a Kobe documentary where I think it's one where it's this Kobe during an NBA game, and it's focused on him and been moving and shooting the trash talk between players and stuff. And he does did one Hurricane Katrina. And he does music videos. He kind of does a whole bunch of stuff. He films stand-up specials. He did, I think, a couple of Chris Rock ones. He's did, I think he did Trevor Noah. There's some younger black comedian he did his. I can't remember who it is. But there's a whole lot to pick from with Spike Lee. And if you start out, I'd go with Do the Right Thing.
Yeah, that's the one I always hear is his, maybe masterpiece or certainly best film.
Most people say that's his best film. I'm not alone. I have other film friends and acquaintances who also love his movie Bamboozled, which is about minstrelsy and blackface and how black people are represented in American media.
Oh, wow.
It's really something. It's not for everyone. I understand why it's divisive, but I personally think it's his best film. It's Spike Adamo Spike, which will irritate some people to no end, but I love how uncomfortable and how unrelentingly angry the whole movie is. And Black Klansman is like a sanitized version of like that a bit, of like Spike at his most angry and at his most raw. But it's kind of, he has Jordan Peele from Get Out to like kind of tamper down his sensibility to something more mainstream, which I kind of like but don't like, but then again, Spike does like Hollywood stuff like Inside Man, and that's one good Hollywood one he did. But yeah, I don't know. He's had a fascinating career.
Yeah, he definitely, like I say, I've not seen any of his films, but just from what I've read about him, he's not somebody who has just found a formula that, like, quote unquote works and just goes, well, I'll just do that because that's what everyone expects of me, and that will make me the most money. He seems to be more interested in just doing a lot of different things.
Oh yeah.
Cool. So back to the Kurosawa podcast. As I say, you're closer to the end of that project now. So looking back over it, are there films from Kurosawa that, having rewatched them for the podcast, are now higher up your ranking of them, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. Your first episode, Lower Depths, was one of my least favorite initially. But then the episode again made me realize that it's better than I remember. But it's not his best by any stretch, but it's still a very good movie. It is just, for the 50s era of him, it's notably different than everything around it, which kind of really threw me off completely when I first saw it.
Yeah, I need to revisit that one, because I enjoyed it quite a bit, but I think of the two movies that I've watched when I've been on High and Low, I think the Idiot was, I think I enjoyed more, and certainly it's like left a stronger impression. Like there's more of that that's kind of stuck with me. But I don't know how much of that was just having read the book and having more stuff to hang the memories on, helped it. I don't know.
Yeah, like you're more familiar with Dostoevsky than Gorky, probably.
Oh yeah, I'd never read any Gorky. I was kind of, I sort of knew who he was, but no one had really like advocated reading him. In fact, everyone I'd asked who'd actually read any had just gone, yeah, there's a reason nobody reads him anymore. Now he doesn't have a state behind him saying, this is the guy whose literature is the best, you should go read that, And in terms of like the non-Kurosawa films you covered, any new favourites from there?
New favourites? Okay, this is tough to narrow down. The first one that comes to mind is, Joel brought this up when he was on, about pigs and battleships.
Oh yes, yeah. That one I really want to watch.
But Pigs and Battleships, it's a satire about Yakuza and these people who are poor who trying to move up in the world, and it's kind of like a Coen Brothers type movie in terms of its tone. I'm not sure how to really talk about it without spoiling like some of the best parts of it that are best surprise, but like it's a good example of like Japanese movies of that era where Joel also mentioned this before on here, but like a character has an abortion and it just happens and it's no big deal, and this depicts like life of the lower class of like, yeah, it sucks and this is what life is like for them in a very frank way, but it also happens to have this bizarre like comic tone at times that kind of comes out of nowhere that will cut you off guard and will make you just like laugh at inappropriate things. Although the director Imamura, he did another movie called The Pornographers. That's this fucked up family drama that you should just watch without knowing anything about it. And it's just incredibly inappropriate and about class and modern 60s Japan. And it is really something else and has a weird framing device that I still don't really understand. I've asked smarter film critic people about it that I've had in a podcast, and they always say, I'm not sure what it's supposed to mean. It's just, I don't know, but pornographers and pigs and battleships are definitely like the big highlights.
Yeah. I think on Flixwise they did a whole episode on Imamura, and he did sound like, if you've got the stomach for him, quite an interesting filmmaker. But yeah, like you say,
oh yeah. Certain things he likes to bring up a lot are like inappropriate parent-child relationships, and like incest kind of comes up more often than you would think, and it's usually in form of like something humorous.
Yeah,
but,
wow.
But it works. It's not trying to be edgy. Like, it's him just kind of like, this is his kooky, weird sense of humor.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check him out at some point. But yeah, certainly like Pigs and Battleships sounds like really, really interesting.
Yeah, and the title is literal, in case you're wondering.
Right. You're not like, symbolic battleship? What are we looking for? Yeah.
There are pigs and there are battleships that show up at various points.
Super. So no one's going to be accused of false advertising. That's what we like. So cue slightly awkward transition, but from one like super famous name of world cinema to another. So from Kurosawa, the movie we're talking about today is a Tarkovsky movie, and I think I remember, Spencer, you said this was one specifically that you wanted to cover if you came back on the show.
Yeah.
So what is it about Ivan's childhood that you really wanted to do this for the podcast?
It's I'm listening to Tarkovsky movies, this and Stalker, and you covered Stalker, and I wouldn't want to talk about that. I feel like I'd sound incredibly stupid trying to talk about that, but
no more so than Lynn and I did.
It's a good episode, but like Stalker's just hard to discuss unless you're like a film critic or a film writer who like knows film theory and shit. But anyways, Ivan's childhood, it was just caught me by surprise. I was expecting it to be more difficult. I'd seen it before, but I liked how simplistic it was. It was dreamy. It was kind of, for lack of like a better word, it's kind of Tarkovsky's like mainstream-ish movie where I feel like I could show this to my parents and they would at least appreciate it a little bit, where Stalker, I can't really think of anyone I know who's not into films that would give a shit about Stalker.
Yeah, I mean, if memory serves, it was you who recommended it to Joel for his other podcast, Please Don't Send Me Into Outer Space, so... Yeah,
partially just to I was curious their reaction, / I think it is worth watching just if you've ever listened to podcasts on Stalker, there have been a couple on various podcasts. It's just a tough movie to dissect.
Yeah, and if ever there was a movie that takes its time, Stalker is that movie.
Yeah, and like Tarkovsky, it was on the Projection Booth podcast, did a Stalker episode, and they do like an in-depth film discussion, and then the host, Mike White, not the writer, actor, director, Mike White, a different Mike White, he will interview people associated with the project or who wrote about it, and he interviewed some Tarkovsky, I think, historian, or someone who wrote a book on him. And apparently Tarkovsky, he didn't mind if people fell asleep on his movies. And like with Stalker, I think it was he found it a compliment if you fell asleep at any point.
Wow, that's not a common thing to hear about film directors. Yeah.
Yeah, like he has this weird, not weird, but kind of pretentious views on film, on whether or not he felt film should be challenging and it makes you question things and not be entertainment. Like he on purpose made it a punishing watch as his films went on. Like, this is him. It's still kind of punishing a little bit, but it's not like his later work where it's like it's impressive and beautiful, but it's just like tough to get through.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is it's an hour shorter than some of his other films. It's on paper, it's a lean 90 minutes, but it still feels like quite a long 90 minutes. So, yeah, people who haven't watched it yet should be aware of that. It doesn't take up that much time, but you'll feel like you've been there for a while. That sounds like really negative, but, it's worth mentioning. Cool. So we should probably go away and watch the film, but as we do for every episode, we launch into the film by saying some Russian, and what we say is what Yuri Gagarin said when he was becoming the first man in space. So it's kind of like, off we go, but in Russian that's one word, and that one word is поехали. So, 3, 2, 1, поехали! And we're back. Spencer and I have just watched Ivanovo Детство, that is Ivan's childhood, Andrei Tarkovsky's first full film. And before we get into discussing what we thought about it this time around, Spencer's just going to give us a quick summary of the plot, such as it is. So, over to you, Spencer.
All right. It starts with this... Wait, was it a dream sequence it starts with, or him in the tree?
I think it's a dream/imagination sequence. Like, literally the first shot you see of him is him behind us, like a spider's web.
Oh, okay.
And then it kind of, like, the camera almost, like, climbs a tree, and you see him from there.
It's either a dream or his imagination, and he's thinking back to him with his mom, and that's a recurring theme throughout the whole thing of him thinking back to his mom. And it's this. Well, we can get into like describing what it actually looks like and stuff later. But so it goes from his dream to his mom. And he's wandering through the wilderness, and he seems happy. And the music is beautiful. And then you get this harsh cut to reality, and he's in basically an abandoned house or a bunker or something. I don't remember what he wakes up in, but you get the sense of he just kind of wanders around initially, and it's World War II. I think it's maybe 45. It's not clear when
No, they never make it clear exactly where or when it's happening.
Yeah, but so he travels and just wanders through the wilderness, the war-torn countryside of Soviet Union, ends up at a impromptu bunker situation, and this commanding officer is like, "Who's this kid? Why are you here?" And Ivan keeps telling him, "Call headquarters and tell number 51 I'm here." And the guy's like, "Sure, kid, whatever." And he calls someone else and tells them to send the kid away. But then he does call 51, and that guy, the commanding officer, is Galtsev. Yeah, and then he realized, this kid is actually a scout for the army.
Yeah, he totally didn't believe him to begin with.
Yeah, and he doesn't act, and Ivan does not act like a child initially. Like when he's with the adults, you get the sense of he thinks he's one of them.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So he kind of just waits, and it's just him hanging out with the officers there for the most part for a while, and then I think 51 comes by. Cole, I'm not sure how you say it.
Oh, yeah, I can't remember the name of the colonel.
It was Kholin.
Oh, yes. Holin. Yeah. Anytime you see like KH, it's actually like this h sound that we don't really have in English. So yeah, Holin is
Holin. Okay. And Holin, he arrives, and then you realize, this kid actually is legit, and he loves him like a son. And there's more hanging out, and then they discuss whether Ivan should go to military school, and they tell him, "Well, you're in a school," and he's like, "No, I'm not going to run away." And he does run away, and you get this really touching scene with this old man and his destroyed home and his pet chicken. And Ivan gets recaptured, and they hang out for a bit again. And every time he falls asleep, there's a dream sequence of him thinking back to his mother or I guess the young girl is his sister. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think she is. Yeah.
And then there's another mission that he can go on. They recall him from military school, which you never see him in military school. It's all set like around this one impromptu base that they set up.
Yeah, one side of a river that they're trying to cross.
Yep, and they go on like this mission that I'm not really sure what the mission was. I was looking up to see if it was a reference to a specific part of World War II in the Soviet Union, but I couldn't find anything concrete of it being a reference.
It's that makes me feel better because I couldn't quite work out exactly what they were trying to achieve either. Beyond like they do recover the bodies of 2 adult scouts who'd got captured by the Germans and executed.
And Ivan is he's 12, so he's small, so he can sneak. It's easier for him to sneak around, and he kind of has this like freak out in the dark where he's kind of playing pretend on getting revenge for the people who kill his family, because it's never clear what happened to his family. You know that they were killed, and there's mention of a death camp. I forgot which one, but there's mention of a death camp, and I think it's supposed to lead you to assume that his parents were sent to a death camp, and his sister too, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I got the impression from that like dream/memory sequence, the second one, that his mother and possibly his sister as well was shot by some German soldiers who just came into their village. That's the impression I got from that scene. And I think his father was just killed because he was at the front. Like, I think he was just fighting in the war, and like many Soviet soldiers didn't make it back. But yeah, that's what I thought the deal was with that.
Oh, okay. It's unclear, the exact thing.
Oh, sure, yeah. Like, you kind of hear some gunshots and you see the mother fall down, but you don't see who shot her or, like, where exactly she was when it happened. So, yeah, it is super ambiguous, like you say.
Yeah, okay, so Ivan runs off on this mission, and you cut to later. It's unclear how much later. Yeah, but it's later, and I forgot how you say the colonel's name already.
Colin.
Yeah, and you learn through narration that Goltsev is still alive. Presumably he's been promoted. Holin was shot, and they're in Berlin, going through some building, and there's all these files of children. I think you only see children. I don't remember seeing any adults.
Yeah, but they read a long list of names and how they were executed, like whether they were hung or whether they were shot, at least in the version of the subtitles that I saw.
Yeah, and he comes across a file of Ivan, and he reads it, and you learn he was hanged, and you cut to a dream sequence of him and his sister running on the beach. And the last shot is a shot of a dead tree on the beach, and that's it.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you for that summary. Like, Tarkovsky is not somebody who majors in plot, I think it's fair to say. So, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't seem interested in a detailed plot. He seems more interested in emotion and, well, I guess emotion, but his movies aren't very expressive. Like, the character's never that hugely expressive. It's kind of more like He's not like David Lynch, where it's surreal, but like it's dreamlike, but it's also kind of grounded at the same time.
I think he kind of like doesn't join up all the dots for you. He puts a bunch of things there, and it's kind of your job to figure out how they fit together in a way.
Yeah, I'm reading a book on Ozu right now, and Ozu had the same philosophy on plot, where he didn't like movies with detailed plots. He felt that got in the way, so he would purposely just give you enough information for you to fill in the gaps yourself. And Tarkovsky takes that a little step further, where I think he leaves you with not even just enough. He gives you like maybe half of what Ozu would give you for a plot, which is not much to begin with, and it's kind of like, figure it out for yourself. And Tarkovsky is a bit more difficult than Ozu, and definitely not as warm as Ozu, but they still kind of play in that same school of it's more about just the characters and the environment than like Hitchcock was with like telling like a tight like suspense story.
Yeah. It's almost like he gives you like a jigsaw puzzle, but he's deliberately taken out like quite a lot of the picture and just gone, okay, well, just, fill in the rest with your imagination.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether that's really a fair analogy, but it's certainly like when you're used to films like having a philosophy of we will tie up the loose ends and kind of make everything pretty clear because we don't want you to get frustrated that you don't understand totally what's going on. That makes it quite a weird watch and almost like semi-frustrating because it's like, hang on, I'm not quite sure what I just watched there. Yeah, at least that's been... I think I've seen 4 out of 7 or 5 out of 7 of his films now, and this probably is the one, like you said, that's most accessible, and therefore you feel least like that. But still, there's an element of I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And I actually mentioned this film in a previous episode on Stalingrad, and just talking about general war films, and how this one really kind of stands out. And it was a weird comparison to make, but I compared it with Dunkirk, which seems really counterintuitive because that's quite spectacular, whereas this is quite low-key. But I think the thing that I saw in it that was similar was that it's very much the story told from one side, because you hardly see the Germans at all. They're nearly always in the distance. At one point you see a party of them like just passing by in the night, but like it never really focuses its attention on them, which is something Dunkirk does as well. And it also like hones in...
In Dunkirk, you never see the Germans the whole time.
No.
But you feel their presence, where like with this, you actually do see some Germans, and they seem fairly, like in the context that you see them, it's fairly benign, and they're just kind of going on patrol, and they don't seem to take it too seriously, which is like kind of like a weird light moment almost.
Yeah, they're just kind of like on a night march. And that film, it's kind of tension being ratcheted up the whole time, whereas this doesn't have that at all. It has it at moments, but most of the time it feels like the enemy's quite a long way away, but you're still never totally safe. But it isn't kind of like that impending like peril. Our heroes are gonna die any minute. It's ratcheting up, It doesn't have that. But I just quite appreciate that compared to war movies that are more like action movies and are kind of like just quite gung-ho. And
like my favorite war movies are more along this line, where it's kind of just a story about what it's like to live in war times. Like this is my second favorite World War II movie. My first favorite is Closely Watched Trains, this Czech New Wave movie about a teen who lives in a Czech town, who works at the train station, and he's trying to lose his virginity. And
right.
and he kind of gets involved in Czech resistance, and it's just like the Nazis are there, and you feel their presence, but it's also not like this thrilling like a propaganda like piece. It's just kind of like, well, this teenager happens to be a teenager at this point in time, and he wants to have sex, and this is just like he's just living in this wartime, and this is just the experience of what it's like to be, a child who's kind of trapped in this situation.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a coming-of-age movie. It just so happens that this particular kid is coming of age with that going on in the background.
Yeah.
Huh.
And also, Closely Watched Trains is the Nazis are stand-in for the communist government in Czechoslovakia at the time.
Yeah, back then. Yeah. I think they split up like very early 90s.
And the Nazis were stand-in, and as a way to get at the government and point out how inept they were. And I think it was towards the end, that was one of the last ones able to do that, because then the government kind of cracked down, and there's some shit went down, and they couldn't make those movies anymore, because the government finally realized what was happening.
Yeah. If you're right in saying it was made in Czechoslovakia, yeah, then you would have had the Prague Spring and then the Soviet reaction to that, and sending tanks in and whatever, and them enforcing a much more like hardline government from then on. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but I like Irish Childhood kind of tying it to Close Watch Trains. It's just a child's experience during World War II, and like this would be like where Irish Childhood is just a portion of his childhood. As you get the sense of, well, he has to fend for himself because there's literally no one else out there to help him. It feels like it could have been like a Jungle Book type story almost. But like it happens to be set during World War II, and he gets help from the military, and like I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting the point you made earlier about how he's sort of almost convinced himself that he's an adult, and he gets really annoyed with people treating him like a child. And I can remember feeling that way when I was 11 or 12. It's just like, why are you telling me what to do? I know what's going on. Just don't, take me for an idiot because I haven't been around as long as you have. So in that regard, yeah, it reminded me of being that sort of an age, obviously in rather more like mundane circumstances.
Yeah, but I just like because like the whole movie is playing with him, with Ivan like being forced to grow up too fast, and that's at least how I feel, because his family is dead, and he's seen some horrible things. He's seen a death camp.
Yeah.
And I guess he snuck in, but he says it like as if he like saw like the gas chambers or something. And again, it's never clearly explained, but all he has seen things that the other soldiers he encounters have never seen. Even like the colonel, who loves him like a son, like tells Gultsev, like, well, I think it's something like he's seen things that you haven't.
Yeah, because Gultsev is, although he's like a junior officer, he's quite a young guy as well. He's maybe like 22, 23, and he's quite dismissive of Ivan. He's like, at one point, it's when he's talking on the phone, the word they use is malchishka, and the normal word for boy is malchik. It's just like a neutral word for boy, but like if you use the diminutive like that, the way he does, like the best English translation would be is like some little kid.
Okay.
And he says this like right in front of Ivan, which he's not happy about that.
Oh no.
Yeah, and particularly because he has proved himself to be really brave and resourceful, and the older officers who've known him for longer do give him a certain amount of respect, especially the colonel, although the colonel ends up sort of falling out with him by, like, as you mentioned during the summary, by trying to send him away to military school. Kind of, the implication is for his own protection. But yeah, Ivan says, well, I don't have anyone. I want to be useful, I think he specifically says. You mentioned the scene with the old man when Ivan runs away that time. I wanted to go into a bit more detail on that one, as that was one of the ones that really stuck with me the first time I watched it. It's a really good scene.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking and touching, and so human. Where like this, he kind of comes across this destroyed house, and but the door frame is still intact, and like part of the wall is still intact. And the old man's just looking for a nail to hang a picture, and it's just, and you see him with his pet chicken on a leash, and it's just like this very like bittersweet scene of him being like, oh, well, who are you? What are you doing here? And he's not even upset. He's just curious who his kid is.
Yeah, and you get the impression that guy is super traumatized. And also, as well as the doors surviving, the stove survives as well. And I possibly reading too much into it, but he repeats a couple of times saying that, that this stove and this chimney will always survive. And I wondered whether this was kind of like an allusion to it sounds really pretentious to say, but to the Russian people, because like the stove was, from what I understand, it super important it was like the most important bit of like a peasant's house going, way back, in and for a long time in Russian history. And like, I guess by the time this film was being made, that was kind of obviously being phased out as things became, increasingly urbanized and more people moved away from the villages. But it was basically the thing that stopped you dying in the middle of winter, is that you had this stove going, and during the night everyone would sleep around it because of or even, in some cases like on like shelves built onto it because of the residual heat, and that's how you stayed warm. So it was kind of like way more significant than just like an oven is to someone in the West. At least that's how I understood it. So
no, that's a good point. I never even thought of like a stove as being key to like survival and like the harsh winters and stuff.
Yeah, it was super important. I mean, this is very much the point where any Russian listeners, if I'm talking absolute rubbish, please write in and correct me. But that is sort of like, as far as I understand it, what he might have been getting at with that. And also in that scene, I like that the last thing that you see is you hear the old man locking the front door. And it's kind of like, it's totally futile because, he doesn't have any walls, really. You can just walk in. But it's still like he's doing that to give himself some kind of sense of security in a place where that's completely fallen by the wayside.
And he's just walking around his house looking for that one nail, and Ivan immediately finds a nail and says, "No, that's the wrong one."
Yeah.
And he just says it so casually, like, oh no, it's a special nail. It's a straight nail, and the one Ivan had is like slightly bent. And it's like, oh man, this guy has been, how long he's been living like this. But you get the sense he's been living like this for a while. And he mentions his wife who was killed, and he mentions Ivan like, aren't you missing anyone? You probably are.
Yeah, just kind of like casually, like, because as much as people, on the Western Allied side of World War II, lots of people were killed, it just wasn't anything compared to what was going on the Eastern Front. It was just horrific. Like, everyone knew somebody who'd been killed, pretty much. Sorry, that went super heavy, but that's something we tend to forget.
Oh yeah, the Allies won because of the Soviet Union, but in America, that part of the narrative is not really discussed. At least in high school and college classes, not really.
Yeah, similar over here. It's kind of like we in Britain like to pat ourselves on the back that we were the bit of Europe that didn't fall, which, it's very helpful when there's a big stretch of water, insulating you from the continent. But yeah, we don't often acknowledge just how many people the Soviets lost in the war effort. I remember hearing the statistic that Germany lost 7 out of 8 of their casualties was on the Eastern Front. So, yeah. So it seems like for us, the Normandy landings and also the war in Italy were major, massive, huge deals, which they were, of course. But it's just that was happening on a much bigger scale over there. And that's, yeah, you kind of wonder whether some of the continuing, political tensions and just general, unpopularity of Westerners in Russia is the fact that we're not very good at acknowledging that they had a really, really bad time of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this anecdote is true, but apparently this is I remember this in high school where the Germans, once the British and Americans got there towards the end, they would surrender to them first before the Russians, because they knew the Russians would be a lot more harsh in treating them.
Yeah, I think I'd heard similar things, like they were much less scared of the Americans and the British wanting revenge in the same way. So yeah, certainly that's something I've encountered that may well be true. But yeah, no, it is. I always enjoy seeing World War II movies from a different side of things. So yeah, this is definitely, if you're at all interested in seeing World War II movies, this seems like it's an essential one, really.
Yeah, it's a different front and it's a different perspective, and instead of it being like a man on a mission thing where it's about a John Wayne type, or I don't know who a British equivalent of John Wayne would be. I don't know, like Michael Caine.
Yeah. Sean Connery.
Yeah, like a Sean Connery if he did any World War II pictures. This is the opposite. This is this what it'd be like if you were a child and you had to survive.
Yeah, and ultimately he doesn't, which is again something that often in Western films it's considered too much of a downer to end with them not making it through.
Yeah, and this was considered for. This was the Soviet entry for the Oscar for Best Foreign Film, but it did not make the cut.
Yeah, I think it won one of the international festivals. I think it might be Venice.
Yeah, the Golden Lion. Seven Samurai won, I think, the Silver Lion there. I know Kurosawa, he was kind of big there at one point at the Venice Festival. But
yeah, and I think Kurosawa and Tarkovsky met quite a bit and admired each other's work a lot, even though they were quite different in terms of their style.
Oh yeah, they were fans of each other. It was during Dare Suwazawa, Kurosawa and him apparently got drunk at a bar, and they started singing the theme to Seven Samurai.
Oh, nice.
It was during filming that and the Moscow International Film Festival, where Mifune was a judge there, and yeah, so maybe Mifune could have been there, given that they're drinking. Mifune probably was there with them.
Yeah, yes. From what you've said about him in the special episode you did on Mifune, yeah, he doesn't seem like somebody to miss out on the opportunity to have a few drinks. No. Going back to individual scenes, there was one that I found super awkward. It was the one where Hawlin meets and is kind of really strongly hitting on. I think she's a nurse. She's kind of like a military nurse because she's in military uniform rather than a nurse's uniform. But she's called Masha, and she's also early 20s, similar age to Galtsev, whereas Hawlin is probably mid to late 30s, I would guess. But yeah, how did you find that one?
It was weird because it felt kind of like he's being predatory. And this in the lurking in the background and trying to get her attention, but at the same time you got the sense of she was just simply used to that because she's the only woman there.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of she's this. I don't say just taking it, but she just has to take it in stride and just do her best to ignore it. But then she kind of finds him kind of charming at a certain point. Cause it's never
Maybe.
It's never Sean Connery level.
Oh no.
It's not him in James Bond mode where it's oh, this doesn't age well. It's just kind of going a little too far and being a little too persistent, but I don't know.
Yeah, he's basically he's just quite patronizing to her. It's oh, are you scared? What kind of soldier are you? And at the same time hitting on her.
But then he dares her to climb up this log.
Yeah,
that's at an angle, and she climbs up the log farther than she has to, and instead of jumping down into his arms, she climbs back down the way she climbed up, which was a great way of showing she was. You could tell she was uncomfortable, but she stood her ground, and that was. Not necessarily a feminist moment, but it definitely was an empowering moment of even though she could have this given in because that's the easier thing to do, she defied his advances, and then there's a weird moment where they kiss, and I got the feeling that she was the one who probably initiated it.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you mean the bit where she's trying to jump across like the really long trench?
Yeah.
And she sort of refuses his offer of help across, but he ends up kind of like grabbing her and like holding her over. It's a really weird shot. It's very memorable if you've seen it.
Oh yeah, and like the camera like dips into the trench when she moves too, which is a really like the camera's a active, like this sounds pretentious as an active character a lot of time because the movie is very up close and personal with the characters.
Yeah, some of the very early shots of Ivan when just after the dream sequence and he's woken up and he's somewhere, on the front line. A lot of it's this incredibly low angle and looking up at him, and it's quite striking because you're just not used to seeing things shot from that angle in a lot of things. But yeah, no, you're totally right. The camera kind of goes all over the place, but mostly it's quite close in.
Yeah, and like the first moments is him running to a spider web, and then the camera like climbs a tree, and I can't help to wonder because it's very stable, so that means someone had to like lug a heavy camera on their shoulder climbing a tree. Like I'm not sure how that was done exactly, because you get like the angle of like looking down from the tree, so it's not like a trick. It felt like it was actually done for real.
Yeah, and I don't think from what you said that you've seen Andrei Rublev.
Not yet.
That's quite an ordeal, but some of the camera work in that is kind of like, how did you do this? Because it's just going along, and it would seem like it must have been on rails, but you'd think, how are these not getting in the shot, Particularly with, I'm no cinema expert, just with how heavy the cameras were back then, how they achieved some of the things that they achieve in that film. It's just really impressive.
On my blog, I covered a series of Yakuza films called Battle Without Honor and Humanity.
Oh, yeah.
And the camera, like the cameras they used, which was like the old movie camera, was heavy and clunky. And the camera work in those movies is very up close and personal and kind of like this, but it's a bit more furious with just like the movement and stuff. And like for those movies, the director Kenji Fukasaku had a cameraman who was a war photographer in World War II who was used to lugging around heavy cameras because the camera work was so intense in those movies that he needed someone who was used to having something that heavy on him to like run up and jump and sprint and like twist around and stuff. Where this feels like the cameraman probably had the endurance to like just lug around a big heavy camera. Because I can't imagine it was light.
No, not in like, I guess, 1961, I think this would have been shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how nature is in this, because you don't really see animals, and like the whole, like you never get a sense of life in the natural world. It's just this desolate wasteland, and it feels frozen in time until the end where it starts to snow. But before that, it's just like I got the sense like this nature is frozen, and like there's not even like a gust of wind or anything. It's just still and empty.
Yeah, and you get lots of shots of like trees that are still standing, but they've kind of had all their branches burnt off, and there's some plant life. But yeah, you don't see much in the way of animals except in some dream sequences. And that sort of brings me on to some continuities with other Tarkovsky films that I've seen. It's kind of interesting, this being the first one, that there is recurring images. Like, he loves a shot of a horse. I don't remember whether there are horses in Stalker at all, but there certainly are a lot in Andrei Rublev. And Solaris, funnily enough, which you wouldn't necessarily anticipate for a movie that's mostly set on a space station. But there's some like gratuitous horses, and it's just something that he likes in his films a lot. If he can have a horse in there, he'll have one. I think he just thought they were cinematic. So that was kind of interesting. And also some continuity in terms of personnel, because the child actor who plays Ivan, turns up in Andrei Rublev in the last like main sequence, which is the one about the forging of this church bell. So that was quite nice. You briefly see, because I think they're in a bombed out old church, but you see quite an old style looking bell that Ivan rings at one point, and it's the same actor.
Oh, yeah, and he's still alive, actually.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I guess he's getting on a bit, but yeah, and also in terms of continuity, you have
the landscape felt like Stalker to me a little bit.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So obviously, like less. I don't know. It's kind of like broken down in a different way because it's broken down in Stalker just because things have been abandoned for a long time. So it's kind of like mostly like the slow decay of time, whereas this is very much like stuff has been blown up with bombs. That's kind of the closest you get to like seeing the Germans most of the time, is you just see like explosions and you hear gunfire in the distance.
Like them wading through a swamp. That made me think of certain scenes of Stalker with all the water in that, and like this you see reflections in the water, and that's kind of the main thing. Like this, when I think of Stalker, I think of this like wading through water.
Yeah, that's another continuity thing. Tarkovsky loves bodies of water, and he also likes rain. You feel like when he has those things in the film, it's not just incidental, it's not just, oh, it happens to be raining. It's kind of like, we're having some rain, and I will focus on the fact that it's raining, and that because he dwells on it, you almost feel like you're being rained on just because of how much he dwells on it.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of cool. You know, if you're going to have something in a film, you know, take the time to make people experience it, I guess.
I like this, going back to Ozu again, but Ozu, in the way he had used time in his movies, was there's no clear indication of time at any point. It's just kind of just, it's like the pace of real life, and like this kind of feels like this, like just the pace of real life, where like, you know, time is passing, but in most cases it's not really that noticeable.
Yeah, because he'll have stuff in there that's just kind of incidental, like at one point he's just kind of like drying, I don't know, he's had a bath and he's just kind of like drying himself, and that's not, you know, particularly interesting, but it's just, yeah, like you say, it's more like how we actually experience the passage of time rather than, you know, most movies kind of only include stuff that's inherently interesting.
Yeah, I like the detail of, well, like wartime sucks, but it doesn't mean you're always fighting. There's downtime, and like it depends on like the war, but in this case, like they seem to have a lot of downtime just preparing for this assault, because like they get the feeling that a massive battle had just happened, given like the lack of people and just the stillness of everything, and them planning a new recon mission for Ivan, and they also want to send him away, so it kind of feels like something, like there's going to be a big attack happening soon-ish, and it's just kind of the in-between time of, well, something is going to happen at some point. No one is very sure when it's going to be.
Yeah, so you kind of have just the boredom of hanging around waiting for either decisions to be made or like reinforcements or supplies to show up. Yeah, which, you know, I quite enjoy my military history for whatever reason, and that's something people talk about, is that the experience of being at war, films make it sound like it's all excitement and stuff going on and it's always terrifying the whole time, whereas from accounts that I've heard, often it's just quite boring because you're just waiting for stuff to happen and there's not a lot that you can really be getting on with. You just have to pass the time until something's ready to happen. So that's kind of interesting, seeing somebody actually try and capture that on film, even though it's not always the most exciting to watch. And that's something like, if you've not watched it, it's not exciting the whole time. So
it is definitely worth watching. It's gorgeous. It's a very stripped down, like simple movie about war. It's just kind of set in the in-between time where it's, you know, it's not much. It's Tarkovsky, so if you're Tarkovsky, you haven't seen this, you know what you're getting. Which, I mean, there's not as much to say at this point, but do you have any like imagery from the set really sticks with you?
I remember, like, it's very early on, just it's before he's met up with the rest of the local, like, Soviet forces. This one shot where it's kind of like a hillside, and it's kind of like slanted across the screen, and you just see these kind of like wisps of black smoke, like there's been explosions nearby. And that's something I definitely remember from the last time, and just kind of seeing bits of debris, and you just see Ivan just walking away from you, and then it sort of switches to another angle and walks towards you. It's like, it doesn't sound that exciting, but it's just really nicely shot. I mean, that sounds really banal, but... And also some of the boat scenes at night towards the end, they're like quite striking as well, just like the contrast.
Yeah, I got kind of what's that movie called? Night of the Hunter. Kind of reminds me of those boat scenes, if you've seen Night of the Hunter.
No, I've not seen that one.
No, it's Robert Mitchum, who went to high school in Delaware because he was a troublemaker. His family sent him to Delaware because there'd be nothing to do. But that didn't really work. He was still a troublemaker. But Robert Mitchum is this preacher who marries widows, and he a fake preacher, and he has tattooed on his fingers so that when he makes a fist, one says love, one says hate.
Oh, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, and it kind of slowly turned into a horror movie in the second half because the two kids of his new wife are immediately suspicious of him, and there's a whole thing of he was in prison, and his cellmate was the husband. Was husband, but he was he got the death penalty, and he has a whole bunch of money hidden somewhere, and so he just wants the money, and this is just the newest widow, and like a whole thing of like a whole long line of women he's gonna take advantage of to get what money they have from their dead husband. And it's really good. It was a failure at the time in '55, but it became a classic, and the director never got to make another movie because it was such a failure.
Oh no. Yeah, sometimes doing something that's a bit out there, banal comment, but yeah, doesn't always pay off, yeah.
Yeah, but back more to our childhood, the boat scenes at night kind of remind me of that, where it's just this beautifully shot, like this like with oars and paddling at night. And I think it was a night scene where you see this down German plane just in the beach, and it's just this, they slowly go past it, and it's just one of those like breathtaking moments in a movie I've seen recently where just like you just can't take your eyes off it because you're like, I gotta see what that thing is. And then you see what it is, and it's just the power, like for some reason, like World War II planes are really striking and beautiful to see on camera. At least I think they're like this. There's something about that design that is so eye-catching.
Yeah, they're more interesting, like aesthetically, than more modern planes, which seem like, I don't know, super functional. I mean, obviously they were functional back then as well, and they weren't like designing them to look nice, but they seem like more memorable somehow because like one fighter jet, at least as somebody who's not really into fighter jets, they all look kind of much of a muchness to me, whereas those World War II planes seem a bit more...
I know what you mean. Like, the fighter jets of now are definitely more... They're better for combat and stuff.
Oh, sure.
but they just don't look as individual and as cool as the bombers and the warplanes of World War II, which were used to kill people, which is terrible. But I understand, like, why people are so fascinated with like World War II in terms of like vehicles and stuff, because there's something just about like that technology that is just kind of eye-catching in a way that like other war technology is not as eye-catching.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? In terms of like this is kind of a bit of a tangent, but you kind of mentioned how Night of the Hunter kind of develops into being like a horror movie towards the end. Yeah. I felt like the last bit of the film in Berlin had kind of like a slightly horror element to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously earlier on you do see those two scouts hanging and it returns to them quite a few times, but it just goes from kind of mild, unpleasant stuff, you know, it's mostly stuff that's off screen that's happening, to just like, you see this guillotine and you see these like nooses that are made of wire and stuff, and all this these sort
yeah.
of implements of death at the end, and it's kind of like, it's sort of like you almost forget that they're not forget, but it's not super emphasized that they're fighting the Nazis during the film. It's not like swastikas everywhere, or, you know, you do hear some German, but it's not like, I don't know, it's not as emphasized as it is in other World War II movies that you see. It's like, remember, everyone, we're fighting the Nazis, and the Nazis are horrible, except that last bit at the end. It's kind of like, oh yeah, by the way, in case you'd forgotten, the Nazis were awful, and they committed all sorts of atrocities, and it's just kind of, like, I'm sure it's, like, meant to be jarring, but it is, because that's not, like, continuous element through the film, it's all like, it's almost like more like, oh, wow, yeah, makes you kind of sit up.
Oh yeah, and there's a whole subplot of a phonograph, and the guy wants to play this not record. I don't know, Black Cylinder, is that phonograph?
No, I think it is genuinely like a record.
Because the guy has like this song about a woman named Masha, which kind of is interesting. It plays into a plot, but there's like a line about that the thing right on the wall. Because before,
oh yes, which you see earlier on, like they're and you see it in the very first scene. But I don't know about your version, but in my version, the subtitles don't explain it until like a later scene where it like dwells on it. But you see it briefly in the background. Yeah, this writing on the wall says something like, there are 8 of us, each of us no older than 19. In an hour they will take us to be killed. Avenge us.
Yeah, and like before Ivan and them leave for their final mission, like you see a shot of the scribbling on the wall, and it says in an hour they'll take us. And then cut to, you know, you learn Ivan was taken and killed. So it's kind of like this weird omen of like, it's telling you exactly what will happen, but like my first thought was like, that's too on the nose, and then it happens like, oh, that was completely on purpose.
But yeah, so I guess that is when you bring that bit of writing on the wall, it is like a common thread. I suppose it's just like, in terms of the actual imagery that you're seeing, mostly it's not that horrific until you get to that final scene, and then it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's real jarring, especially considering it's children.
Oh, yeah.
They don't explicitly say it was children that were killed using these mechanisms. I don't even want to say what they are, because it's children. But if you're paying attention, like, you'll realize, oh no, those were used to kill 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. It's not like, this is like where they killed, you know, like they were like barely into puberty.
Yeah, it is really, really horrible. I mean, later on in this series, I'm planning to cover Come and See, which I understand is kind of like that, except like all the way through. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting how they did that. I'm not quite sure what my point is. I guess I'm just saying, if you haven't seen the film already, compared to some World War II films, it's quite tame, but there's still like implicitly some upsetting stuff to be aware of. But yeah,
it's it definitely is worth watching. It's the runtime makes it definitely worth watching. If you are iffy on Tarkovsky, start with this, because I think his shortest movie by a long shot.
Yeah, I think Mirror's not that long, but Mirror's more difficult than this, I would say.
Yeah, just start with this if you like it, then maybe go to Stalker. I made a mistake of watching Stalker first, because I had no clue who Tarkovsky was. It's kind of like, oh, this movie sounds cool, and I loved it, but I haven't seen it since, because it's just, I don't know, it's just Stalker. It's a special movie, and this, I feel like I could rewatch a whole bunch of times and still enjoy it, because it's not like oppressive. Like, it's not oppressively dark until the end, and it's kind of it's kind of light, but it's also kind of down to earth, and like, not gritty, but like, it's just, this is what World War II was like, and it's like no bullshit. It's just, you know, if you want to know what it was like for Soviets in downtime, this was it. This is just what it was like. And like compared to Stalker, like the characters are a lot warmer. It's not as cold as Stalker is, which I feel like that could put people off to Tarkovsky, where like this feels kind of warm in terms of like his character work, where with it seems like actually, I don't know, like Stalker reminds me of like Kubrick a little bit, with like the approach where it's kind of like it's beautiful to look at, but it's also kind of distant, and it's forcing you just to fill in the blanks. Where this is a little more like he will give you some more stuff, so it's easier to digest. Plus, his character work I think is better.
Yeah, like it's easier to identify with the people on screen, whereas like Stalker, there's people on screen, but none of them are particularly. I mean, not that like having likable characters is the be all and end all, but you almost kind of have to sometimes kind of at least sort of see yourself in their shoes, which is quite hard to do with Stalker. Yeah,
this is just definitely entry level, like a Russian art house, but like entry level or like Soviet films. Like this, if you're gonna start watching Russian films, this is a good place to begin because it's Tarkovsky and the runtime is wonderful compared to some other Russian films. And it's not as grim and dark, and it's easy to digest for the most part.
Yeah, and it's not. There's plenty of dialogue, but it's not massively just people in rooms talking to each other in extremely dense prose. You know, there's a lot more space than that. It's not just dialogue the whole time, which can make watching any film, you know, when you're watching it with subtitles, quite hard work. So yeah, like you say, this is a bit more accessible. Cool. So, if people are interested in hearing more from you, Spencer, where should they go, internet-wise?
Check out High and Low, a Kershaw podcast. It's where me and former guest on the show, Joel, take a Kershaw movie and pick another Japanese movie from the same year and talk about them in 2 separate episodes, and we do special episodes. And we just did one on Sword of Doom with Tony Stella, who is a wonderful artist, and he's super knowledgeable on pretty much anything relating to movies. If it's like Japanese or like French or Italian or whatever, like he will do most of the talking for you if you want him on. But us also, he's a great guest to have on. He's super knowledgeable, and we have him to talk about Tatsuya Nakadai and samurai movies and stuff like that. And I will be on Flixbites Canada talking about David and Lisa in a month-ish time. I'm not sure when it's coming out.
Oh, it will definitely be out by the time this is out, so...
Okay, yeah. So, by the time this is out, that will already happen. But I have a blog, Jailhouse 701, Japanese Cult Cinema, and by the time this is out, I should be done my series on Hideo Gosha, who was a director who made samurai and Yakuza movies, and he was kind of like, his movies were sleazy, but also prestigious, and got critical acclaim, and kind of relating to World War II, he was drafted into war when he was 15. This was 1945, and he was in the kamikaze unit. He's supposed to go on his final mission for the Emperor, but it never happened. And so that kind of influenced his filmmaking and his whole life philosophy and stuff, and ties into his childhood with the war and whatnot. But yeah, it's called the line between sleaze and prestige. Because his movies are super sleazy, but also
well put together.
Yeah. He knew what he was doing. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Spencer. You've been a fantastic guest, and yeah, we should definitely check those out. So, thanks everyone for listening, and das Vidania, folks. So that's it for this episode, but before I go, I'd like to thank Sasha Ilukovic and the Highly Skilled Migrants for the use of their song Cold in our intro. You can find that song and the rest of their back catalogue on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us by leaving a rating at Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. That second one, Podchaser, even lets you rate individual episodes, so if this episode particularly stood out to you, you can let other listeners know that you enjoyed it. Recommending the show on social media is hugely helpful as well. If you can spare a moment or two to do that, it would really make my day. Thank you very much. Speaking of social media, please find us and say hi on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can also drop us a line at roosefilsunite@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.